You've broken my trust again. I can't believe you would do this.
Jake's voice thundered through the room, filled with a mix of anger, disappointment, and heart-wrenching pain. His eyes, usually so warm and full of love for me, were now blazing with fury. I stood there, frozen in place, my heart pounding in my chest like a jackhammer. Hey everyone, welcome to Worldly Whispers. Let's get started. Jake and I have been together for 6 wonderful years. But in the 3rd year of our relationship, I made a colossal mistake. I cheated on him with my close friend, Eli. At that time, I was so wrapped up in my own self-centered world that I took Jake for granted. Our relationship, which was once the most precious thing to me, seemed like something I could toy with. I didn't understand the depth of my feelings for Jake, and the temptation to stray was too strong to resist. The day Jake found out about my betrayal was like a nightmare. I remember the look on his face, a look that I will never forget. His body seemed to deflate, and all the life and joy seemed to drain out of him. He couldn't even look at me as he said the words that would change our lives forever. We're done. The months that followed our breakup were some of the darkest of my life. I was alone, and for the first time, I truly began to see Jake for who he really was, an amazing, kind-hearted, and loving man. He had always been there for me, through every up and down. Whether I was facing a difficult project at work or dealing with family drama, Jake was my rock. He would hold me in his arms, listen to my problems, and offer the most comforting words. I realized that I had made a huge mistake, and I couldn't bear the thought of living without him. So, I swallowed my pride and begged him to give me a second chance. After a lot of soul-searching and long, tearful conversations, Jake finally agreed to take me back. But there was one condition. I had to promise never to have any contact with Eli again. I readily agreed, determined to make our relationship work this time. And for a long time, I kept my promise. I didn't even think about Eli. My focus was on rebuilding my relationship with Jake, and I was happy. We talked about our future, made plans for our wedding, and I thought that we were finally back on track. But then, something unexpected happened. Eli, who was not just a friend, but a close family friend, reached out to me. At first, I was hesitant. I remembered my promise to Jake, and I knew that talking to Eli could potentially cause problems. But as we started chatting, memories of our old friendship came flooding back. We had shared so many good times together, and I missed that connection. Before I knew it, I was talking to Eli regularly, behind Jake's back. It wasn't romantic. We were just catching up on each other's lives. But deep down, I knew that I was wrong. I was breaking my promise to Jake, and I was risking our relationship all over again. One day, while I was sitting on the couch, scrolling through my phone and chatting with Eli, Jake walked into the room. I didn't even notice him at first, but when I looked up and saw the expression on his face, my heart sank. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice cold and accusing. I tried to come up with an excuse, but the words died in my throat. I knew that I'd been caught red-handed. That's when he exploded. "You've broken my trust again. I can't believe you would do this," he shouted. I tried to explain, to tell him that it was just a friendly conversation, but he wouldn't listen. He was too hurt, too angry. He needed space, and I couldn't blame him. A few days later, I received a text from Jake. As I opened it, my hand was shaking. After a lot of thinking, "I just can't trust you. Whether your relationship with Eli is platonic or not, this is the 2nd time you betrayed my trust. The worst part is not just this incident, but now I can't help but wonder how many other times you've betrayed me without my knowledge. You say this is it, but how can I believe you? I love you and want to make this relationship work, but it's going to take a lot from you. We're postponing the wedding indefinitely. It took me 10 months to feel secure in our relationship again after we got back together last time. I have no idea how long it'll take this time. Eli is to be blocked. You'll never talk to him again, and that includes family events. If you know he'll be there, don't go. If you don't know and he shows up, you ignore him. I want unrestricted access to your phone, social media, and emails. I need to know all the passwords for all your devices. No hanging out alone with male friends. If you go out with your girlfriends, you have to be home by 1 a.m. There'll be more, but these are my demands, non-negotiable. Take some time to think about it. I was shocked. These rules seemed so extreme. I mean, I hadn't cheated this time, and I felt like I was being punished for something I didn't do. But at the same time, I knew that I had messed up big time, and I had to do something to fix it. I was in a state of utter turmoil after receiving Jake's text. On one hand, I fully understood the depth of his pain and his desperate need for reassurance. I had betrayed him not once, but twice, and his trust in me was now hanging by a thread. On the other hand, the rules he had laid down felt like a heavy, suffocating burden. I was frustrated that I was being penalized so severely when I hadn't actually cheated this time. But the love I had for Jake was still strong, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing him for good. So, I decided to reach out to him and ask for a face-to-face meeting. We met at a small, cozy cafe that held so many sweet memories for us. As I walked in, I saw Jake sitting at a corner table. His head was bowed, and he looked so tired and defeated. When he looked up and our eyes met, I saw a storm of emotions in his eyes, pain, anger, but also a glimmer of hope. We started talking, and for the first time, I truly saw how vulnerable Jake was. He opened up about how my actions had made him feel like he was worthless to me, like our relationship was nothing but a joke. His voice trembled as he spoke, and then, to my horror, tears started streaming down his face. I had never seen Jake cry before, and it felt like a knife was twisting in my heart. "I can't go through this again," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "If you can't promise me that you'll never keep secrets from me again, I don't think we can move forward." I reached across the table and took his hand. "I promise, Jake, I'll never hurt you again. I'll be completely transparent from now on," I said, my own eyes filled with tears. We then delved into a discussion about the rules. He admitted that they might seem a bit extreme, but he emphasized that they were only temporary. He said that once we started couples therapy, we could re-evaluate and adjust them. I agreed, feeling a small sense of relief. We left the cafe with a newfound determination to fix our relationship, but I knew that the road ahead was going to be long and difficult. Over the next few weeks, I made a conscious effort to prove myself to Jake. I handed over all my passwords without hesitation, and I made sure to always be home by 1 a.m. when I went out with my girlfriends. I completely cut off all contact with Eli, even when I saw him at a family gathering from distance. It was incredibly hard, but I was willing to do whatever it took to save my relationship with Jake. As the weeks turned into months, our relationship gradually started to improve. We went to couples therapy religiously, and with the guidance of the therapist, we learned to communicate better and understand each other's feelings on a deeper level. Jake started to trust me again, little by little, and we even began to plan our wedding once more. We set the date for this fall, and I was overjoyed. I was looking forward to starting a new life with Jake, a life filled with love and mutual respect. But then, everything changed in an instant. About 3 months ago, a new colleague joined our office. His name was Ryan, and the moment he walked through the door, I felt a strange, magnetic pull towards him. He was incredibly handsome, with a chiseled jaw, deep blue eyes, and a smile that could light up a room. I had never experienced such an intense physical attraction to anyone before. At first, our interactions were purely casual. We would chat briefly in the break room or exchange a few words during team meetings. But as time went by, our conversations grew deeper, and we started to share more about our personal lives. We discovered that we had a lot in common, from our love for the same indie bands to our passion for traveling. Before I knew it, romantic feelings started to develop. I tried my best to suppress them. After all, I was engaged to Jake, and I had promised to be faithful to him. But it was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore my feelings for Ryan. And then, one day, he caught me off guard by confessing his feelings for me. "I know we both have partners, but I can't help the way I feel about you," he said, his eyes locked onto mine. I was shocked, but at the same time, a part of me felt a sense of relief. I had been feeling the same way, but I was too scared to admit it. I told him that we had to consider our spouses, but our feelings for each other just kept intensifying. It was like a wildfire that couldn't be extinguished. Ryan started to confide in me that he had stopped being intimate with his wife because he felt like he was betraying me. And without even realizing it, I started to distance myself from Jake physically as well. I knew that I was treading on dangerous ground. If this got out, not only would Jake be devastated, but Ryan's wife would also be deeply hurt. And yet, I seemed to be powerless to stop my feelings for Ryan. I was in a complete mess, and I had no idea how I was going to get out of the situation without causing a lot of pain to the people I cared about. As my feelings for Ryan grew deeper, I found myself in a quagmire of guilt, confusion, and unbridled passion. Every day at work became a constant battle of wills. I would try to focus on my tasks, but my eyes would involuntarily wander towards Ryan's desk. The simplest of glances between us would send a jolt of electricity through my body, making it impossible to ignore the intense connection we shared. Ryan and I started to find excuses to be alone together. We'd stay late at the office, ostensibly to finish up projects, but in reality, we just wanted to be in each other's company. We'd talk about everything from our childhood dreams to our deepest fears. With each conversation, I felt myself falling deeper under his spell. At home, things with Jake were deteriorating rapidly. I was constantly on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The affectionate gestures that were once second nature between us now felt forced and awkward. Jake noticed the change, of course. He would ask me if I was okay, and I'd plaster on a fake smile and mumble something about being tired from work. But I knew he wasn't convinced. One evening, we were having dinner in a tense silence. The air was thick with unspoken words. Jake finally put down his fork and looked at me with a mixture of concern and suspicion. "You've been acting really strange lately," he said. "Is there something you're not telling me?" My heart skipped a beat, and I felt a lump form in my throat. I wanted to come clean, to tell him everything, but I was too afraid of the consequences. "It's just we're stressed, Jake," I lied. "There's a big project that's been keeping me up at night." But the truth couldn't be hidden forever. One day, while Ryan and I were having a private conversation in a secluded corner of the office, a nosy colleague walked by and overheard us. I saw the look of shock on her face, and I knew that rumors were about to start spreading like wildfire. Sure enough, within a few days, the rumors reached Jake's ears. He came to my office, his face pale and his eyes filled with hurt. "Is it true?" he asked. "Are you having an affair with someone at work?" I froze, my mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I wanted to deny it, to tell him that it was all a misunderstanding, but I couldn't bring myself to lie to him again. "Jake, I don't know how to explain," I stammered. His face contorted with pain and anger. "I thought we were past this. I thought we were building a future together. How could you do this to me again?" he shouted. I started to cry, hot, guilty tears streaming down my face. "I'm so sorry, Jake. I didn't mean for this to happen. I love you, but I also have feelings for Ryan," I sobbed, finally admitting the truth. Jake was silent for a long time, his eyes fixed on me. Then, he said in a voice that was barely above a whisper, "I can't believe this. I thought you had changed." With that, he turned around and walked out of my office, leaving me alone with my thoughts and my overwhelming guilt. I knew that I had to make a decision, and it was one of the most difficult decisions of my life. I couldn't keep stringing both Jake and Ryan along. I had to choose between the man I had loved for 6 years, the man who had forgiven me for my past mistakes, and the man who had swept me off my feet with his charm and passion. I thought about my past betrayal of Jake. I had been so selfish back then, not realizing the value of our relationship. And now, here I was, repeating the same mistake, but this time, it was even worse. I had not only betrayed Jake's trust, but also his love. As for Ryan, I was torn. I was head over heels in love with him, but I also knew that his situation was complicated. He was still married, and his divorce was going to be a long and messy process. Even if we did end up together, would our relationship be able to withstand the storm of emotions and the damage we had caused? After days of agonizing soul searching, I finally made up my mind. I decided to cancel the wedding. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. I called the wedding planner, my voice breaking as I told her the news. She tried to talk me out of it, but I was resolute. I also had to tell our families and friends, each call a painful reminder of the mess I had created. I knew that I had to tell Jake in person. I went to our apartment, the place where we had shared so many memories, both happy and sad. When he opened the door and saw me, his eyes hardened. "What do you want?" he asked coldly. I took a deep breath and said, "Jake, I'm here to tell you that I'm canceling the wedding. I'm so sorry for hurting you. You don't deserve this." He looked at me for a long time, and then, to my surprise, he started to cry. "I loved you so much," he said. "I thought we were going to be together forever. I wanted to reach out and comfort him, but I knew that I had no right to. I had caused him too much pain. After that, I turned my attention to Ryan. I told him that we had to be careful from now on. His divorce was not going to be easy, and we had to be patient. He agreed, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes. He wanted to be with me now, but we both knew that we had to wait. I was left with a broken heart and a lot of regret. I had lost the trust of the man I had planned to marry, and I was now in a relationship that was full of uncertainty. But I knew that I had to face the consequences of my actions and try to move forward, no matter how difficult it might be. After the heart-wrenching conversation with Jake and the difficult decision to cancel the wedding, the days that followed were a blur of pain and self-loathing. I was constantly haunted by the image of Jake's tear-stained face and the sound of his broken voice. I had not only shattered his dreams, but also his trust in love and relationships. I tried to focus on my relationship with Ryan, but it was far from easy. His divorce process was turning out to be even more complicated than we had anticipated. His wife was not going to let go easily and was fighting him on every front, from property division to custody of their pet dog, which they both adored. Ryan was stressed out, constantly on edge, and our once passionate conversations were now often overshadowed by his worries about the divorce. At work, the atmosphere was also incredibly tense. The rumors about my affair with Ryan had spread like wildfire, and I could feel the judgmental eyes of my colleagues on me every time I walked through the office. Some people were openly cold towards me, while others whispered behind my back. I tried to ignore it, to focus on my job, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. One day, while I was having lunch alone in the break room, trying to avoid the prying eyes of my colleagues, a senior colleague named Sarah came and sat down next to me. She had always been kind to me, and I was grateful for her company. "I know what you're going through is tough," she said gently, "but you have to be strong. These things happen, and life goes on." Her words were comforting, but they also made me realize how much I had messed up my life. As the weeks turned into months, Ryan's divorce seemed to be dragging on indefinitely. He would come to me, looking defeated, and tell me about the new obstacles that had arisen. I tried to be supportive, to listen to his problems, but a part of me was starting to grow impatient. I had given up so much for him, and here we were, still waiting for a future that seemed so uncertain. During this time, I also started to reflect on my past mistakes and the choices I had made. I thought about how I had taken Jake for granted, how I had been so selfish and short-sighted. I remembered the times when he had been there for me, through thick and thin, and how I had repaid him with betrayal. I realized that I had not only hurt Jake, but also myself. I had lost a relationship that was built on years of trust and love, and I was now in a relationship that was based on secrecy and deception. One evening, while I was sitting alone at home, Ryan called me. His voice was heavy with despair. "I don't know how much more of this I can take," he said. "My wife is making this divorce a living hell. She's even threatening to expose our relationship to everyone if I don't give in to her demands." I was shocked. I had never thought that things would get so ugly. "What are we going to do?" I asked, my voice trembling. Ryan was silent for a moment. Then he said, "I don't know, but I can't let her blackmail me like this. I'm going to talk to my lawyer and see what we can do." After we hung up, I sat there, feeling more alone than ever. I realized that I had put all my eggs in one basket, and that basket was now teetering on the edge of a cliff. A few days later, I received a call from an unexpected source, Jake's best friend, Tom. He had always been friendly with me, but I was surprised to hear from him now. "I know this is a strange time to call," he said, "but I think you should know that Jake is really struggling. He's not taking the breakup well at all. He's been drinking a lot, and he's not himself." His words hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been so focused on my own problems that I had not stopped to think about how Jake was coping. I knew that I had to do something. I couldn't just sit back and watch Jake destroy himself. I decided to reach out to him to see if there was any way I could help. I sent him a text, asking if we could meet. To my surprise, he agreed. We met at a park, the same park where we had had our first date. As I saw him walking towards me, I could see the toll that the past few months had taken on him. He looked pale, tired, and there was a sadness in his eyes that I had never seen before. We sat down on a bench, and for a long time, neither of us said anything. Finally, I broke the silence. "Jake, I'm so sorry for what I've done. I know that saying sorry isn't enough, but I just want you to know that I never meant to hurt you this much," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me, and for a moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of the old Jake in his eyes. "I loved you, he said. "I thought we were going to have a future together." I started to cry. "I know, Jake. I was so stupid. I wish I could take it all back." We talked for a long time about our past, our mistakes, and our hopes for the future. Jake told me that he was trying to move on, but it was hard. He also said that he still cared about me, but he didn't think he could ever trust me again. I understood his feelings, and I didn't blame him. As we parted ways, I realized that I had lost something truly precious. I had lost Jake, and I might never get him back. And as for Ryan, our future was still uncertain. I was left with a heavy heart and a lot of questions about what the future held for me. After the emotional meeting with Jake, I was in a state of deep reflection. I was constantly torn between my lingering feelings for him and my complicated relationship with Ryan. The days seemed to drag on, each one filled with a sense of unease and uncertainty. One day at work, I was sitting at my desk, trying to focus on a report, when I received a message from an unknown number. The message simply said, "We need to talk about Ryan. Meet me at the coffee shop around the corner at 3 p.m. My heart skipped a beat. I had a sinking feeling that whatever this was about, it wasn't going to be good. At 3 p.m., I nervously made my way to the coffee shop. As I walked in, I saw a woman sitting at a corner table. She looked familiar, but I couldn't quite place her. As I got closer, I realized with a shock that it was Ryan's wife, Emily. She looked at me with a mix of anger and sadness. "I know you've been seeing my husband," she said bluntly. I opened my mouth to say something, but no words came out. "I'm not here to cause a scene," she continued. "I just want you to know the truth about Ryan." She then proceeded to tell me a story that left me stunned. According to Emily, Ryan had a history of infidelity. Our relationship wasn't the first time he had cheated on her. She showed me pictures and messages of him with other women dating back years. I felt sick to my stomach. I had been so blinded by my feelings for him that I had ignored all the warning signs. "After I found out about you, I started doing some digging," Emily said. "I discovered that he's also in a lot of debt. He's been using the money we were supposed to save for our future to fund his affairs." I was in disbelief. The man I thought I loved, the man I had given up so much for, was a complete stranger to me. After leaving the coffee shop, I was in a daze. I couldn't believe what I had just learned. I immediately called Ryan and demanded to meet him. When we met, I confronted him with everything Emily had told me. At first, he tried to deny it, but when I showed him the evidence, he broke down. "I'm sorry," he sobbed. "I was so afraid of losing you that I didn't want to tell you the truth." I looked at him with disgust. "You've lied to me, betrayed me, and made a fool out of me," I said coldly. "We're done." With my heart broken once again, I decided to take some time off work and go on a solo trip. I needed to clear my head and figure out what I really wanted in life. During my trip, I visited some of the places that Jake and I had always talked about going to. Being there, surrounded by the beauty of nature, made me realize how much I had taken him for granted. I started to write Jake letters, pouring out my heart to him. I told him about everything that had happened with Ryan, how I had been deceived, and how much I regretted hurting him. I didn't expect him to respond, but to my surprise, he did. His letters were filled with pain, but also a glimmer of hope. When I returned from my trip, I reached out to Jake again. We met for coffee, and this time, the atmosphere was different. There was still a lot of hurt between us, but there was also a willingness to try and move forward. We started to see each other casually, taking things slow. I also decided to make some changes in my life. I started seeing a therapist to work through my issues with trust and commitment. I realized that my past mistakes were not just about the men in my life, but also about my own insecurities and lack of self-respect. As the weeks turned into months, Jake and I's relationship gradually healed. We didn't rush things. We took the time to get to know each other again, to build a new foundation of trust. And slowly but surely, I started to feel like I was finally on the road to redemption. I knew that the scars of the past would always be there, but I was determined to learn from my mistakes and become a better person. And as I looked forward to the future, I was filled with a sense of hope and optimism that I hadn't felt in a long time.
If this story touched you, show your support by liking and subscribing. Your encouragement helps us keep sharing memorable stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one.